Today is the 100th birthday of Sister Elaine MacIness, Sambozen Roshi, whose life and teaching planted deep roots in the Dharma, roots that spread and continue to nourish practice in this Sambozen lineage and beyond. So I'd like to talk about Sister Elaine a bit. She died 2 years ago at the age of 98. Elaine loved a party. She looked forward to celebrating her 100th. So this past Sunday, students of Elaine's and their students gathered in Toronto to celebrate, sitting together, a couple rounds, then sharing a feast of stories and songs. So in glad solidarity, I'd like to begin with an expression of gratitude to Elaine MacInnes Roshi, and by letting some of the details of her life shine a light on our lives now and on this practice. Elaine's parents were musicians, avid, and she became a fine violinist. Maybe part of what was sort of the opening for her into Zen music. She grew up in New Brunswick, and in World War II, in her teens, the British established a base in her hometown. And there were a number of loving relationships that developed out of that, including Sister Elaine, who was partnered with a British pilot, and her sister. And in both cases, the men were killed. So for Elaine, her fiance's plane flew a mission in rough weather and just flew into the side of a mountain. She went on to earn her bachelor's degree from a conservatory there in New Brunswick, and then she spent 2 years at Juilliard. Went back to Calgary, playing in the orchestra there and teaching, and all the while taking this time to discern. That line from Mary Oliver. What will you do with your one precious life? In 1953, Elaine entered a Roman Catholic order. She became a postulant on December 8th, Bodhi Day, though she didn't know it at the time. Rick McDaniel, a lovely practitioner, author, who has now published several volumes on Zen teachers and interviewed all around, including us, including Henry, Reuben, he's just created this wonderful compendium of stories. And here's a bit from what he's written about Elaine. Sister Elaine entered religious life somewhat later than usual, was 30, before she completed her postulancy. While in the novitiate, she came to reflect on a passage from Paul's letter to the Galatians. And she wouldn't have known it at the time, Rick mentions, but Thomas Merton believed that this passage expressed the spirit of Zen. The key in the passage, the phrase that leapt out at her, was no longer I, not I. She took this sort of striking passage into her, not knowing exactly why, but taking it as a gift. I desired earnestly, she said, to know it experientially, this no longer I, not I. And at the same time, I was equally determined to discover how I was going to practice it. So the story goes on, she happens upon a book by a Jesuit who takes up this passage and is using theological language about divine indwelling and this intimacy and this nearness. And he happens to use the word identification. Sister Elaine writes, when I read that, my head world, she's got a hyphen, and heart world, hyphen, exploded from 2 to 1, or as Zen masters say, not even 1. She writes, the joy of the raindrop is to enter the ocean. Total identification. Now, how to practice that? How to practice? So, this article says, Elaine attempted a few experiments on her own. And this is her words. But they all went through the thinking process, which I soon discovered was creating an objective twosome. I did, however, have my own inspired insight that the secret or core of that teaching lay in the 2 words, not I. So in 1961, Elaine takes her, what they call final vows, and she was sent to Japan. Early on there, she has a meeting with a Tendai master. As Elaine describes it, he took 20 minutes to serve a cup of tea in silence. And then he asked her, Buddhist master, how do you pray? What do you do with the body? And Elaine immediately said, it's not important. And he said, oh yes, it's very important. Not long thereafter, Elaine met Father Hugo LaSalle, a Jesuit who was practicing Zen with Yamada Koun Roshi. He tells Elaine about Zen, encourages her to take it up, and he's prepared to take her to Koun Roshi, but she says, I think I'd rather study and practice with women, among women. So at her own choosing, she starts sitting with nuns at a Rinzai temple in Kyoto. She spent 8 years practicing there, going to every sesshin, joining every zazenkai, repeatedly going there. And it's austere. In sesshin, they get up at 3, and you're dressed in the zendo at 3:05. And the abbess doesn't speak English and is very suspicious of Elaine as a religious. But still, she persists. As she said, while I couldn't understand much, something happened. At the very least, she came to see that what one does with the body matters. She writes, Zazen engages one's whole being, body, mind, and breath. So the story goes on. It's actually, I'm leaving a lot out. But by then, Father LaSalle had been approved to open a Zen center and guide students, and Elaine joined a retreat under his guidance. She says, I had some kind of little experience. So on the way home from the retreat, Father LaSalle, rather than checking her himself, he said, I'm taking you to Koun Roshi. And she became his student. This was a period in her life where she was practicing together with Ruben Habito, now Ruben Habito Roshi, John Rig Roshi, and this whole cohort of Westerners gathered there. So in 72, Elaine attended her second session with Koun Roshi, a Rohatsu sesshin. I was just rereading this book of hers today, Light Sitting in Light, and I'd like to share this passage. Keep in mind this whole background, 8 years with the nuns, study and formation in her own, deep, for her, her deep Christian tradition. She writes, the Roshi tried several angles to again get me moving, as this period is often called in Zen. This is going on from how he tried and I wouldn't budge. At the next Doksan, he completely surprised me by asking, where is God? I pointed to my heart. He thrust out his hand and said, isn't God also in the little finger? And immediately he rang his handbell to conclude the interview. Back in my sitting place in the Zendo, I looked at my neglected fingertips. For all my yearning to appreciate God dwelling there, the stronger pull was right over the heart, and I was uneasy. She talks about this doubt and somehow this trust. I resumed my practice and was soon on track again. In the early evening on the 6th of December, as the stars began to come out, that heart spot burst open. And its beautiful contents exploded right through the whole of me until there was no Elaine left. This grasping of not I was an experience of intense happiness, and for several weeks my short gata, this verse that came up for her in that moment and again, it was, and now my joy is complete. She says, I rushed down to the Doksan, this interview lineup, and shortly was admitted into the Roshi's presence. His smile broadened until it matched my own, and he started the age-old examination for one who has had an authentic experience. He confirmed mine immediately. Finally, the gate had opened, and to my great delight, I found there had never been one there at all. There is always free access to the source of love. Think of that phrase, original love, original face. Kneeling in front of this Buddhist master with bursting heart, I knew I had just touched it. And she writes, how appropriate that the dictionary meaning of satori is to know. Elaine received Dharma transmission in 1980. It was 20 years after she started practicing. And then she taught in the Philippines, in Oxford, in Toronto, and in each of those places established herself by gathering people together to collaborate a prison ministry that continues going into the prisons and teaching incarcerated persons to sit. Just to sit. So, what about a koan to honor Elaine MacInnes Roshi? Here's one I think she would appreciate. This is case 11 in the Blue Cliff Record, or Hekigan Roku, and it appears again in the Book of Serenity, or Shoyo Roku, as case 53, called Obaku's Devourers of Dregs. Here's the case. Obaku, instructed the assembly, saying, "You are all devourers of dregs. If you keep going on your way like that, when will you be able to have your today? Do you know that in this great empire of Deng, there is not a single Zen teacher?" Then a monk came forward and said, "What would you say to those who direct their assemblies and lead their followers in various places?" Obaku said, "I do not say that there is no Zen. I only say there is no teacher." Just feel Elaine hovering right here with us. Intimate. So let's just look at this a bit. I'll keep my eye on the clock. First, Obaku, or in Chinese Huangbo, died in 850, renowned Chan master. He lived during the time of Joshu, Nansen, Baso, and Hyakujo, from whom he received Dharma transmission. Rinzai, or Linji, the founder of the Rinzai school, was Obaku's Dharma heir. So the Rinzai tradition really comes down to us through this master. And just as a reminder, Sanbo Zen is a coming together of Rinzai and Soto, these two streams into one. Obaku, kind of reminiscent of Bodhidharma, he's an imposing figure, about 7 feet tall. And he had a lump on his forehead, said to be caused by the force of his deep prostrations, going down and just, I guess, hitting his head on the floor, over and over. Tradition describes that lump as a large pearl. There's a story that goes with this, that once while bowing, a student challenged Obaku, asking why he was always bowing, since he didn't hold to religious traditions and practices. What did he hope to attain with his bowing? Obaku slapped the student, who was a member of the nobility and later became the emperor. And he said to him, "You know nothing at all about Zen. There is nothing to attain. Bowing has nothing at all to do with traditions and religious practices. I just bow." There's another vignette about Obaku in the record. This is how Andy Ferguson puts it. While on pilgrimage, Obaku met another monk. They talked and laughed, just as though they were old friends who had known each other for a long time. Their eyes gleamed with delight as they then set off traveling together. Coming to the fast rapids of a stream, they removed their hats and took up staffs to walk across. The other monk tried to lead Obaku across, saying, "Come over, come over." Obaku said, "If elder brother wants to go across, then go ahead." The other monk then began walking across the top of the water, just as though it were dry land. The monk turned to Obaku and said, "Come across, come across." And Obaku yelled, "Ah, you self-saving fellow, if I had known this before, I would have chopped off your legs." The monk cried out, "You're truly a vessel for the Mahayana. I can't compare with you." And saying this, it's said, the monk vanished. A vessel for the Mahayana, or great vehicle, the one boat. In other words, awakening isn't about saving yourself. It involves, implicates, includes all beings. And there's no way to it, to this across, apart from here, from now. This. Obaku calls it your today. He instructs his assembly, rails against them, and instructs us. You're all devourers of dregs. If you keep going in this way, when will you have your today? Kind of odd. When will you have it? What other time is there? Devourers of dregs, gobblers of lees, feeding on the remains when beer or wine or coffee are made. Reading, traveling around, teacher to teacher, app to app, searching outside ourselves, ingesting what others have said, imitating. Go on like that, and where will you experience? Where will you taste the intimate fact of this? Of who, of what you truly are for yourself. Obaku is frustrated, but he's not just ranting. Ironically, he's teaching. Do you know that in the great empire of Tang, there is not a single Zen teacher? What? What about you, Master? What about Joshu, Nansen, Baso, Hyakujo? Or as the monk puts it, what would you say to those who direct their assemblies and lead their followers in various places? What would you say about Mountain Cloud Zen Center? All this practice going on. Zazen, Dharma talks, one-to-one interviews, Zazen Kai, sesshin. And Obaku says, I don't say there's no Zen. I only say there's no Zen teacher. That phrase, not I, resounds. If you take this up as a koan, the only way to respond is out of your own experience, your own intimate answer to the question, what is Zen? What is this sitting? What is your today? One pointer that comes up. These words right now are nothing but this one entirety coming up. This functioning, Dogen says, of your true self. Flowers on the altar, the Buddha, the candle, the ache in the knees, the leg going to sleep. Fundamental and manifold. Empty and infinitely capacious. So I'd like to share just a little of the richness that comes in the wake of this teaching, this koan. And this is a bit from that collection called The Secrets of the Blue Cliff Record. That's a compilation of Hakuin Zenji, so 18th century. He's a Rinzai master, and Tenkei is a Soto master. It's amazing to read this, so I'll just share a bit. Obaku said, I don't say there's no Zen, just that there are no teachers. Hakuin comments, this statement of Obaku's is poison in the water. Whoever drinks it dies. I misunderstood this for 20 years. Don't take it lightly. And then Tenkei adds, gobblers of dregs. Everywhere they say that people who consume writings and sayings are gobblers of dregs. But Da Hui, this 12th century successor of Engo, who collected koans, and Da Hui used them. He says, Da Hui explained that if writings were dregs, then the oak tree in the garden and Masagin, these famous koans, would also be dregs. So it cannot be seen as limited to writings and sayings. From the perspective of the Zen eye, even practice is gobbling dregs. Even travel for study is gobbling dregs. Even talk about doing meditation or reading scripture, sutras, is all involvement in writings and sayings. Therefore, even to speak of awakening and delusion, views of Buddha or views of Dharma is all gobbling dregs. This wonderful tradition that says over and over, words can't reach it. Say something anyway. Hakuin says, where will you have your today? Where, he asks, where do you think you'll find this place? Tenke, today means the time. Today means the time when the great task is complete. And now my joy is complete. Excluding nothing. Tenke goes on, do you know there are no Zen teachers in all of China? What is a teacher in the context of Zen? Is there such a thing? Is there not? Look, he says, look in your own nostrils. And finally, Hakuin, I don't say there's no Zen. This saying is hard to penetrate. It's an extremely subtle saying. The path of language ends. It ends. And our practice begins today. Wow, there's so much in this teaching. I'd just like to close, I think, with this one word that leapt out of it all. And just a note that Huang Po, or Obaku, his posthumous title is Chan Master Without Limits. No teacher. Here's his teaching. Your true nature is something never lost to you, even in moments of delusion, nor is it gained at the moment of enlightenment. It is the nature of your own mind, the source of all things, your original luminous brilliance. You, the richest person in the world, have been going around laboring and begging, when all the while the treasure you seek is right here. It is who you are. Thank you so much for being who you are and for this shared practice.
We'll chant the 4 great vows.